A very good Sunday evening to everybody out there. Welcome to the Sports Note for Sunday, February 27th, 2022. I, of course, am your host, Jim Crinity, and coming hot off the heels of last night's latest episode of the Wise Guy Sports Show with myself and Mike Martinez. We're going to actually get right into it. One of the things that we alluded to towards the end of last night's show was in just a couple of short weeks. As a matter of fact, 2 weeks from today is Selection Sunday in the NC2A. We actually have March Madness coming up, where we actually did have we did have the 2020 season canceled. Last year was all done kind of in the bubble, so it's going to be nice to actually see these games actually back at the way that it was before the pandemic, the way that it was in 2019, where we're going to be able to have regionals and conference tournaments, at the host cities where they should have been. But one of the things actually one of the big stories kind of coming out of yesterday were the fact that 7 top 25 teams were upset yesterday. There were 9 teams in action. Only Baylor, who's ranked 10th, and Duke, who's 7th, were the only teams who did not suffer the upset bug. And ironically enough, Baylor's win was over number 5 Kansas. And so right now, another one of the big upsets that did get a little bit of traction, but we're going to talk about something that happened with that program earlier in the week, was Michigan State, who last week was 25th, had a rough week, was 19th, dropped out of the top 25 altogether, and ironically enough is just sitting one vote behind Iowa for that 25th ranking right now. So technically, if you want to get, down to the letter of the law in the AP poll, Michigan State is actually ranked 26th. But Michigan State with a 68-65 win over number 4 Purdue yesterday. A game that was a lot closer than a lot of people thought. And it's more validation that when it comes, like once the clock hits, once the clock is starting to approach midnight as March Madness and Cinderella start coming out, with conference play winding down and conference tournaments winding up. Also, as the calendar starts to get closer to March, Tom Izzo always has his teams ready to go. The story here isn't really the upset, although it was nice because Izzo now surpassed Bob Knight for the most head coaching wins in Big Ten history, and also with that win, which was which was number 662 in his storied career. He also now just sits 2 wins all time behind the late great John Wooden for 40th all time. Keep that into perspective here for a moment before we move on. That Wooden won 9 championships with UCLA, is arguably considered the greatest college basketball coach in history, and is only 40th on the all-time wins list. But you also got to keep in mind that there were not as many Division I programs back then. The tournament only was 32 teams. The Pac-12 was really just the Pac-8 back then. So you only had you only had at best 3 wins instead of potentially 5 if you get into the qualifier, as it is now for the Pac-12, or technically Pac-14. To be able to just get into the dance, you didn't have the play-in games, naturally with this field not at 64, but it's also another storied notch in the career of Tom Izzo, who's already in the Hall of Fame. Having that one national championship, having the 8 Final Fours, having the 8 Big Ten tournament championships, having the 10 Big Ten regular season titles, being heavily courted, or at least his name comes up in rumors constantly when a team is looking to rebuild in the NBA. Now, keep in mind, Izzo is now in his late 60s, but when you think of the greats in college basketball right now, who are the elder statesmen, really kind of 3 names come to mind, and that's Krzyzewski, Boeheim, Izzo. And maybe not even Boeheim with a lot of the controversies that he's had to go through at Syracuse, especially over the course of the last 10 years, and then also with now this being the final season for Krzyzewski, Izzo is now going to take over as that statesman. And there's one, in terms of the college basketball coaching fraternity, there is one guy who honestly needs a lesson in etiquette, humility, and just being, the teacher that these young men that you've recruited to get them ready either for life or a career playing basketball, whether it's in the NBA, the G League, or overseas. And that's actually Michigan head coach Juwan Howard, who, if you actually saw last week during the handshake line against Wisconsin, took a swing at Wisconsin assistant head coach Joe Krabenhorst. And I apologize if I'm saying that name correctly. It might be Krabenhoft. The backstory was that Wisconsin had called a timeout with under a minute to go and the game already, well in hand at that point as Michigan was putting on a full court press to be able to not only get the ball advanced into the front court, but also to be able to get a lot of their players off the floor in favor of the walk-ons and in turn kind of empty their bench. Whereas Michigan was still trying to scratch and claw towards the end. We're not going to get the outcome they were looking for. Still had all 5 starters on the floor. Krabenhoft grabbed Juwan Howard's arm in the handshake line, wanted to actually explain the actions because the rest of Wisconsin's coaching staff was behind him. Krabenhoft was, the furthest ahead in the handshake line, and then Howard then proceeded to wave his finger in front of Krabenhoft's face, saying, "I'm going to bleeping remember this." There was a little bit of pushing and shoving. Howard came back and threw a closed fist or some form of partially open hand or something into Krabenhoft's face. In turn, was suspended the final 5 regular season games by the Big Ten and fined $40,000. He will be eligible to return for the Big Ten tournament for Michigan, which honestly they are not going to get into the NCAA tournament with their resume as it stands right now. I believe they lost again today, whereas Michigan State, they are just picking up momentum, as is typical with the Tom Izzo ball club. There were some coaches that actually thought of, in the wake of this, doing away with the handshake line altogether. Izzo was quoted as saying, that to me would be the biggest farce, joke, ridiculous nature of anything I've ever heard of. Basically saying it was taking away another teachable moment for these players. And let's be honest, most of these players, unless they're seniors or fifth-year seniors or graduate students who still have eligibility left, are not old enough to rent a car, go into, honestly, to buy, to purchase alcohol from the concession stands in the buildings that they're playing in. And goes on to say, quote, "We're going to tell them not to man up and walk down a line to someone who's kicked your butt and have enough class to shake their hand is utterly ridiculous." And I, for one, completely commend Izzo for making these types of remarks. Izzo is the coach's coach. Between him and Krzyzewski, they do nothing but exude class and humility, regardless of what you think of their programs, regardless of what you think of Duke. You really cannot argue with the way that Krzyzewski runs his program. You don't really hear very many bad things about the Duke program on the whole. Some of the players you might take umbrage with, naturally we all remember Christian Laettner. Even a few years ago we remember Grayson Allen, being a hothead and everything. We remember that Kyrie Irving only played 13 games there and then turned into the head case in the NBA that he is now arguably still a very, very good point guard. But with the fact of Izzo making these types of comments, Izzo is the kind of guy where when you make these comments, somebody's going to step back and listen, and you need to take these to heart. And this is actually what Howard needs to do. Howard needs to step back. Yes, he already gave his apology. He's in the middle of the suspension right now. He won't be back for a couple more weeks when that Big Ten tournament starts, which is typically the weekend prior to Selection Sunday, where the Big Ten champion will be probably determined as the pairings are coming out, because they usually play that game in the middle of the afternoon, and the pairings come out usually at 6 Eastern, so that game usually doesn't tip off until 3, maybe 4 Eastern, where the committee's already got their mind made up. But it's also something, again, where when Izzo says something like this, Howard needs to step back and listen, and a lot of coaches across the country need to listen to this as well. For NHL players, after a grueling 4 to 7 game playoff series, to step back and bang and hit each other, in in a war of attrition, because remember, in the NHL, when it comes to the playoffs, their overtime, it's not like how it is in the regular season. They play until there's a winner, where sometimes you have these 3, 4, sometimes even 5 hour games going, these triple, quadruple overtime games that are a full 20 minutes. To quote, Ernie Banks, let's play two is not out of the realm of possibility if you get a triple overtime NHL game in the playoffs. Um, but with Izzo basically getting his team ready, they're now going to be creeping themselves back in. They're probably going to get into the field of 68. And whether they actually win a game, whether they go out in the second round, whether they make a Cinderella run, it's irrelevant, because they were not picked to finish very high this year. They were not picked to be among the elites. They did actually just come out. That win yesterday snapped a little bit of a slide for them, where they plummeted from, again, 19th all the way out of the top 25. But the bigger message here is Izzo, being one of the elder statesmen and one of the most respected college coaches in any sport right now, when he says something, you sit back and listen, and Juwan Howard needs to take this to heart. So let me know what you guys think. We actually have already set the date for the next Wise Guys show. It's going to be March 12th, and then the very following week, March 19th, I've actually, my partner Mike Martinez, has already announced that I will be taking part in the third annual Big Rican mock draft, along with Alex from Row 7 and Willie from the Shakeback Media Group. So that is going to be at least a 90 minutes, at the very least, it's going to be 90-minute live show on Facebook and YouTube that night. So definitely something you guys want to check out. If you have not watched the most recent episode of the Wise Guys show, posted to YouTube, that can actually be found in my Wise Guys playlist on this very channel. And we also have another video that's probably going to be going up either tonight or tomorrow, where one rumored baseball contract is it's not the catalyst or not the reasoning for the labor stoppage, but it's just another example as to why Major League Baseball is in the position that it's in. So let me know what you guys think in the comment box below. Like and subscribe if you're interested, and the link to the blog will be out there as well. And we will see you probably sometime either tonight or tomorrow again. Take care, everybody.